At 10:33 a.m. on October 24th, 1944, Commander David McCampbell sat in a machine the Japanese called a flying coffin. His F6F Hellcat weighed as much as a small truck, handled like a freight train, and looked about as graceful as a brick with wings. The enemy pilots who saw it coming laughed. They flew the legendary Zero, a fighter so light and nimble it could dance on air. Their planes were built by samurai philosophy. His was built by a company that made bridges. The laughter would last exactly 90 minutes. By the time McCampbell landed back on the USS Essex, 15 Japanese aircraft would be burning in the Pacific Ocean, and the myth of the invincible Zero would be drowning alongside them. This is the story of how one overweight fighter and the man who refused to play by the rules rewrote the entire book on aerial warfare. The deck of the Essex vibrated like an earthquake. McCampbell's Hellcat sat there, fat and defiant, its Pratt & Whitney double wasp engine hammering out a rhythm that sounded more like industrial machinery than aviation equipment. This wasn't the elegant purr of a finely tuned race car. This was 2,000 angry horses trying to rip themselves free from their bolts. McCampbell glanced at his fuel gauge. Half full, maybe less. The deck crews had been scrambling, throwing every available fighter into the air to intercept a massive Japanese strike force painted on the radar screens. There hadn't been time for a full tank. He was about to fly into the biggest aerial battle in human history with a hungry engine and borrowed time. The catapult officer raised his flag. McCampbell shoved the throttle forward. The Hellcat didn't leap. It groaned. It muscled its way off the deck through sheer brute force, dragging its 9,000 pounds of aluminum into the sky, like a construction worker hauling steel beams. Below him, the Pacific stretched endlessly, deep blue and indifferent, ready to swallow anyone who made the slightest error. But the real threat wasn't below. It was above. The ship's radar had painted a nightmare. 60 Japanese aircraft, bombers, and fighters in tight formation, racing toward the American fleet. Between that swarm and the carrier stood exactly 2 Hellcats, McCampbell and his wingman, Ensign Roy, rushing. The odds were 30-1. To understand why this looked like assisted suicide, you need to understand what McCampbell was flying. The Japanese A6M0 was a masterpiece of minimalist engineering. It weighed almost nothing, stripped of armor, devoid of self-sealing fuel tanks, built from lightweight alloys that made it float through the air like a paper airplane. When a Zero pilot pulled back on the stick, the aircraft responded instantly, pivoting on invisible axes, turning circles so tight they defied physics. The Hellcat, by comparison, was an insult to aerodynamics. It was thick, wide, and heavy. Pilots called it the aluminum bathtub, or Grumman's tank. It was designed by engineers who built their planes the way bridge builders approach construction, with an obsession for structural integrity and a complete disregard for elegance. Japanese veterans looked at the Hellcat's squared-off wings and bloated fuselage and saw confirmation of everything they believed about American incompetence. They assumed it was just a bigger, dumber version of the Wildcat fighter they'd been destroying for 2 years. In their world, weight was death. Agility was everything. The samurai code valued the swift blade over the heavy shield. They were right, according to every rule in the book. If you tried to turn fight a Zero in a Hellcat, you died. If you tried to loop with a Zero, you died. The Japanese had spent years perfecting the art of the dogfight, treating aerial combat like sword fighting in 3 dimensions. But David McCampbell had read a different book. He knew this war wouldn't be won by fencing masters. It would be won by sledgehammers. The Hellcat wasn't designed to dance. It was designed to absorb punishment and keep flying. Behind McCampbell's seat sat an armor plate thick enough to stop machine gun rounds. His windscreen was bulletproof glass, inches thick, distorting his view but keeping his skull intact. The fuel tanks were wrapped in layers of self-sealing rubber that would swell and close puncture holes instantly, preventing the catastrophic fires that turned Zeros into falling meteors. But the real secret was the engine. That double wasp radial sitting up front wasn't just a power plant. It was a factory of violence. It could push the Hellcat to speeds that would rip the wings off a lightweight Zero. More importantly, it could dive. When a Hellcat pushed over into a dive, 9,000 pounds didn't just fall. It accelerated like a meteor, building speed that made the controls stiffen and the airframe scream. At those speeds, the Zero's lightweight construction became a fatal liability. Its wings would warp. Its controls would lock. It couldn't follow. But at 14,000 feet on that October morning, McCampbell didn't have the altitude advantage yet. He was climbing hard, watching his manifold pressure gauge, feeling the Hellcat claw for height. Beside him, Rushing's aircraft bobbed in the turbulence. Two blue specks against white clouds. The radio crackled. The Japanese formation was closing fast, less than 20 miles out. Other American fighter divisions had been vectored to different raids, leaving a massive gap in the defensive screen. McCampbell and Rushing were the only things standing between those bombers and the Essex. Then he saw them. At first, just a distortion on the horizon. Then a swarm, like angry wasps, spilled across the sky. Dive bombers carrying armor-piercing bombs meant for carrier flight decks. Above them, weaving like predators, were the fighters, the Zeros. McCampbell started counting. 10, 20, 30. He stopped at 40. The final count was closer to 60. In any military academy on Earth, the textbook answer was clear. Dive away, call for help, live to fight tomorrow. Engaging 60 enemy planes with 2 fighters wasn't bravery. It was mathematics saying you're dead. But McCampbell wasn't a hothead. He was the commander of Air Group 15, an Annapolis graduate who viewed warfare as an engineering problem, not a test of courage. He looked at that swarm and didn't see 60 invincible warriors. He saw 60 mechanical problems waiting to be solved. He knew they were low on fuel after their long flight. He knew their pilots were exhausted, and he knew their arrogance would destroy them. They'd see 2 lone American planes and assume easy prey. They'd break formation to chase the kill. And in breaking formation, they'd lose the only thing that made them dangerous: discipline. McCampbell keyed his microphone. His voice was calm, almost conversational. He told Rushing to stay with him and not to separate under any circumstances. He sounded like a man deciding which tool to use for a stubborn bolt. He checked his gun sight. 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, 3 in each wing. Not the elegant 20mm cannons of the Zero with their explosive shells and limited ammunition. These were industrial instruments. They fired heavy slugs of lead that smashed through metal, bone, and glass by pure kinetic force. He had 2,400 rounds. If he was careful, that gave him roughly 30 seconds of trigger time. 30 seconds to stop an armada. The Japanese formation spotted them. McCampbell watched the enemy fighters dip their wings. The Zeros at the top of the formation, the high cover, peeled away from the bombers and turned toward the 2 Hellcats. They took the bait. The Japanese pilots probably smiled behind their oxygen masks. They had numbers, altitude, and superior turning performance. They rolled in for what they assumed would be a quick kill, expecting the Americans to panic and break. To try turning with them in the kind of knife fight the Zero was built to win. McCampbell didn't turn. He kept climbing. He dragged the heavy Hellcat higher and higher, trading airspeed for altitude, banking on the raw power of that double wasp to pull him up faster than the Zeros could follow. It was a game of physics played in the vertical dimension. The first flight of Zeros closed the distance, their propellers glinting like knives in the tropical sun. They were hungry. They were fast. And they had absolutely no idea they were flying into a trap designed by a man who treated dogfighting like a calculus problem. As the lead Zero opened fire, sending tracers arcing through empty air behind McCampbell's tail, the American commander tightened his grip on the stick. The lesson was about to begin. The trap was elegant in its brutality. In a traditional dogfight, you win by turning tighter than the enemy, getting behind him in a contest of geometry. But McCampbell knew that if he tried to win a geometry contest against a Zero, he'd be dead in seconds. So he decided to ignore geometry entirely and focus on physics. He turned the sky into a vertical roller coaster. He and Rushing wouldn't fight the Zeros on the horizontal plane, where the Japanese planes were light and agile. They'd fight on the vertical line, where gravity was the ultimate judge. The Hellcat was heavy, yes, but gravity loves weight. McCampbell watched the first group of Zeros climbing toward him, their engines straining as they pulled their noses up, trying to reach his altitude. They were trading their speed for height, bleeding energy with every foot they climbed. They were becoming slow, vulnerable targets hanging in the air like fruit. He waited until they reached the apex of their climb, that split second where the plane runs out of upward momentum and hasn't yet nosed over. It's a moment of total vulnerability. He shoved the stick forward. The Hellcat responded with a heavy, surging drop. The double wasp roared. Speed built rapidly. 250 miles per hour, 300, 350. The controls stiffened in McCampbell's hands. At high speeds, air becomes concrete. In a zero, the controls would lock up, the wings warping under pressure. But the Hellcat was built with hydraulic muscle and steel cables. It thrived in the dive. McCampbell lined up the lead zero in his reflector sight. The Japanese pilot, realizing too late that he was stationary relative to the diving American, tried to roll away. Useless. The closing speed was too high. McCampbell didn't spray bullets. He hammered them. A 1-second burst. The 6.50 caliber machine guns roared. The recoil felt like hitting a wall. In that second, 150 rounds of armor-piercing, incendiary ammunition left the wings, converging at 300 yards into a space the size of basketball. The stream hit the zero at the wing root. No sparks, just sudden catastrophic disassembly. The wing snapped off like a twig. Fuel vaporized and ignited. The zero disintegrated into a fireball, tumbling toward the sea. McCampbell didn't watch it fall. He was already hauling back on the stick, using his massive speed to rocket back up into the safety of altitude. He traded kinetic energy back for height, zooming away before the vengeful wingmen could react. This was the boom and zoom. Strike from above, kill, and vanish before they can respond. It was a tactic of discipline, not passion. Rushing followed him down and back up, the two Hellcats acting like pistons pumping death into the Japanese formation. They leveled off at 20,000 feet. The Japanese formation was in chaos. They'd expected a dogfight. Instead, they were being picked off by invisible snipers who refused to play by the rules. McCampbell looked down. They'd killed the lead elements, but dozens of aircraft still swarmed below, and now the Japanese were angry. The enemy commander realized chasing these high-altitude ghosts was pointless. He signaled his bombers to continue toward the American fleet and ordered his fighters to form a defensive wall. This terrified McCampbell more than the guns. If those bombers got through, the Essex, his ship, his crew, his home, would be at the bottom of the ocean. He couldn't just pick them off one by one anymore. He had to disrupt the entire attack. He keyed his radio and told Rushing to loosen the formation. They were going to work the Japanese like sheepdogs working a flock, positioning themselves above and behind the enemy formation. Every time a Japanese plane drifted out of position or lagged behind, McCampbell or Rushing would dive on it. They weren't just killing. They were creating terror, teaching the Japanese pilots that leaving formation meant death, but staying in formation meant flying straight and level, becoming easy targets. A psychological vice grip. The fight dragged on for 20 minutes. An eternity in air combat, where most dogfights last 3 minutes. The physical toll was immense. Every time McCampbell pulled out a dive, 5 or 6 GS crushed him into a seat. His blood weighed like iron. The G-suit squeezed his legs, but his vision still grayed out, the world narrowing to a tunnel with the enemy at the center. His arms ached from wrestling the heavy stick. The cockpit was sweltering. Tropical sun beating through the canopy, heat radiating from the engine firewall inches from his feet. He was drenched in sweat, his flight suit sticking to his skin, throat parched from breathing pure oxygen through the rubber mask. Then the gun started jamming. During a steep dive on a bomber, McCampbell pressed the trigger and only 2 guns fired. The outboard guns on both wings had stopped. The ammunition belts twisted in the feeding chutes from the violent maneuvers. A Hellcat with 2 guns was just a noisy target. McCampbell cursed, hauling up and away. He recharged the guns using the cockpit handles, slamming them back and forth, trying to clear the jams. He tested the trigger, for guns roared to life. The 2 outboard guns were dead for good. He was down to 66% firepower. But Rushing was still with him, welded to his wing like they were one organism, covering his 6, clearing tails, taking shots whenever McCampbell flushed a target. The Japanese formation was fracturing. The constant pressure from above was making them nervous. The bombers were weaving, ruining their fuel efficiency. The fighter escorts were exhausted from constantly craning their necks, looking for the two blue demons that kept dropping from the sun. McCampbell saw hesitation in the enemy formation. They were slowing. They were vulnerable. He checked his fuel. Maybe 30 more minutes if he was careful. He checked his ammo counters. He'd fired roughly 800 rounds. Plenty left. He signaled rushing. They were going aggressive now. No more picking off stragglers. They were cutting into the meat of the formation. There was a group of Zeros flying close cover for the bombers. They looked complacent, thinking they were safe in the middle of the pack. McCampbell rolled the Hellcat over. He wasn't looking at the Zeros. He was looking through them. He selected a target, a flight leader, identified by stripes on his tail. Kill the brain and the body dies. He pushed the nose down, ignoring the protest of his own body, ignoring the graying vision, ignoring the heat. The Hellcat screamed, wind rushing over the wings, drowning out the engine roar. He wasn't just a pilot anymore. He was the tip of a spear thrown by American industry. The Japanese flight leader looked up. Too late. McCampbell was already in range. The 4 remaining machine guns opened up, tracing a line of fire through Zero's cockpit. Glass shattered. The pilot slumped. The plane rolled left and collided with its wingman. 2 kills for 1 burst. The explosion rocked the formation. The Japanese plane scattered like birds when a hawk strikes. The discipline was gone. The formation shattered into dozens of individual dogfights. Exactly what the commander didn't want. But now McCampbell was in the middle of it. He'd lost his altitude advantage. He was down in the mud, surrounded by 20 angry Zeros who wanted him dead. The boom and zoom was over. The brawl had begun. The manual said that if a Hellcat pilot found himself slow, low, and surrounded by Zeros, he was already dead. David McCampbell was about to test that theory. McCampbell was at 15,000 feet, but his speed had bled off in the last attack. The Japanese fighters swarmed like hornets around a kick nest. A Zero on his left broke hard, trying to get inside his turn. Another Duff on the right, firing cannon shells that whipped past his canopy like glowing stones. McCampbell slammed the throttle to the firewall, engaging water injection. This was the emergency setting, dumping water into the cylinders to cool the fuel mixture, generating 300 extra horsepower. The double Wasp screamed, hammering out 2,300 horsepower. The Hellcat shuddered and leaped forward. He didn't try to turn with them. He knew the Hellcat's turning radius was wider than a city block. Instead, he used momentum. He shoved the stick forward and dove, simply running away. It looked like cowardice. It was calculation. As the heavy fighter accelerated past 400 miles per hour, the lightweight Zeros couldn't keep up. Their airframes were too light to punch through air resistance. McCampbell extended away, putting 2 miles between himself and the swarm. Then, with the discipline of machine, he pulled up, used the speed to regain altitude, and turned back. He wasn't fleeing. He was resetting the board. He leveled off above the gaggle of confused Japanese pilots circling, looking for the American they thought they'd chased off. McCampbell picked his next victim, a Zero flying slightly apart. The pilot probably checking his fuel gauge. He rolled in. This time, he didn't feel adrenaline. He felt cold professional detachment. He was a surgeon removing a tumor. He lined up the shot, calculated deflection, and fired. The 4 working guns barked. Tracers stitched across the Zero's fuselage. The Japanese plane didn't explode. It just stopped flying. The pilot slumped, the engine seized, and the aircraft rolled onto its back and fell away. That was kill number 5. Officially an ace in a single day. But there was no time to celebrate. Rushing was shouting over the radio. He had a Zero on his tail. McCampbell banked hard, pulling GS that blurred his vision. He cut across the circle, aiming not at the Zero but at empty space in front of it. He pressed the trigger. The stream of bullets created a wall of light the Japanese pilot had to fly through. The enemy pilot saw the tracers too late. He flew into the buzzsaw, his engine cowling shredded. Smoke blinded him. He broke off, diving to save himself. Rushing was clear. The fight settled into a bizarre rhythm. The Japanese formation was still heading toward the American fleet, but slowly, demoralized by the constant attacks. McCampbell and Rushing worked them like wolves tearing at a bison's flanks. Dive, kill, climb, reset. But the Hellcat's mechanics were complaining. Constant full-power climbing, and diving was drinking fuel at a terrifying rate. McCampbell's gauge dropped past the quarter-tank mark. He did the math. He was 100 miles from the Essex. He needed enough gas to get home, find a carrier, enter the landing pattern, and trap. Every minute here was a minute. He might have to swim later. Then there was ammunition. The counters were low. He had to be miserly. No more long bursts. Every shot had to be a kill shot. He spotted 3 Zeros flying in tight V formation. They looked confident, thinking tight spacing would protect them. McCampbell saw a target-rich environment. He came in from a high 6 o'clock, drifting down slowly, masking his approach in the sun's glare. He got within 100 yards, suicide range. If the Zero exploded, debris would take him out too. He didn't care. He aimed at the left wingman. Half-second burst. The Zero's wing tank caught fire, flaring like a match. The lead pilot and right wingman didn't even notice. McCampbell slid his sights right. Another half-second burst. Rounds hit the cockpit. The canopy shattered. The plane pitched up violently, stalled, and spun down. 2 kills in 10 seconds. Now the leader noticed. He looked around, saw his wingmen gone, and panicked. He pulled into a tight loop, trying to get behind the attacker. McCampbell anticipated it. As the Zero looped up, exposing its belly, he fired his remaining rounds into the soft, unarmored underside. The Zero shuddered and fell apart in midair. That was kills 7, 8, and 9. 9 enemy aircraft destroyed by 1 pilot in 1 sortie. Impossible. A statistical anomaly. But the battle wasn't just shooting. It was endurance. McCampbell was physically wrecked. His right arm cramped so badly he had to use his left hand to help pull the stick. His neck was raw from rubbing against his collar as he constantly scanned the sky. Dehydrated. Headache pulsing. And now silence creeping in. The guns on his left wing had stopped completely. Empty. He checked the right wing. Maybe 50 rounds left. A 2-second burst. He looked at Rushing. The ensign's plane was battered, holes in the tail, fuselage streaked with oil and cordite. Rushing radioed that he was completely out of ammo, but the kid refused to leave. He stayed on McCampbell's wing, flying dummy attacks, diving on enemy planes just to scare them, forcing them to break formation even though he couldn't shoot. A bluff of heroic proportions. 2 pilots on fumes and bravado, bullying a strike force that still outnumbered them 10-1. The Japanese commander had seen enough. He'd lost his best pilots. His formation was scattered across 50 miles of ocean. His bombers jettisoned their payloads into the sea to gain speed and escape. The attack on the Essex was over before it reached the fleet. The surviving Japanese planes turned west toward the safety of the Philippines. They were running away. McCampbell watched them go. He wanted to chase, to catch one more straggler. But the fuel gauge was tapping empty. The engine temperature was spiking. The Hellcat had done everything he asked, but physics has limits. He keyed the mic and told Rushing it was time to go home. The silence that followed was heavy. The adrenaline crash hit them both. The shaking in McCampbell's hands wasn't from the engine anymore. It was biology reacting to 90 minutes of mortal combat. He banked toward where the Essex should be. The ocean below was empty. No ships, no wakes. Just endless blue. The fleet had maneuvered while they were fighting. They were lost, low on fuel, exhausted. This was the quiet terror every naval aviator feared more than enemy bullets, running out of gas over open ocean. McCampbell leaned out the fuel mixture, pulling the red lever until the engine ran rough, then inching it forward until it smoothed. He was squeezing every drop of energy from the remaining gasoline. He climbed to maintain glide path, trading his last engine power for altitude. If the engine died, he wanted to be high enough to glide as far as possible. He scanned the horizon, eyes burning from salt sweat. He needed a white wake. He needed the geometric shape of a flight deck. Then, a glint on the water. A tiny speck of white foam. Then another. The fleet. He corrected course. The Hellcat felt sluggish, tired. The aluminum tank was exhausted. As he got closer, he saw the Essex. It looked small, like a toy in a bathtub, but to McCampbell, it looked like heaven. He didn't have fuel for a standard approach. No fuel to circle and wait for a landing slot. He called the tower, his voice raspy and cracked. "Carrier Essex. This is 99 Rebel. Roughly 5 gallons remaining. Request immediate clearance." The tower cleared the deck. Other planes in the pattern were waved off. McCampbell dropped his landing gear. The hydraulic thump felt like a punch. The drag slowed the plane, and he had to add power to keep from stalling. But adding power burned his last drops of gas. The engine coughed, sputtered, the propeller windmilled, then caught again. Razor's edge. He turned on to final approach, lining up with the center line. He could see the landing signal officer waving paddles. He could see the arresting wires stretch across the wood.